everyone to the HeroX Innovation Leadership Speaker Series. I'm joined today by Nelly Kalu, Product and Innovation Manager for the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. Nelly, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to hear about your journey in journalism, investigative journalism. Can you tell me a bit about your background?
Absolutely. I was an engineering student that didn't feel that I would make a really good engineer or build a career around it. I was getting bored years and years by, which is an irony to where I've landed right now, really. And on the side, I was doing journalism. I was having talk shows, having radio programs and stuff like that. And so I just went down that path. I realized that I enjoyed so much more being a journalist than anything else I was doing. And as a journalist, I started in broadcasting, many years in radio and TV, and then investigative journalism. And when COVID hit, I decided to just dump the broadcasting aside and focus strongly on the investigative side, investigating disinformation, misinformation, the transference of information, the biases and emotions, that we associate to the information that we consume. And of course, lack of trust in journalism, all of that began to build, of course, and that just my career trajectory just took me towards paths of interest because the ultimate goal was to find sustainability for journalism before I even realized that that's what I was searching for. At least sustainability for journalism in my country and where I live. I'm Nigerian and I live in Nigeria for most of the time. So that was the beginning of my search, I think, for something that takes journalism away from the tradition to what's viable, what's acceptable and attractive to audiences, and what people can trust again and feel like they're partners of it. So, with that in mind, I started crawling right back to my engineering thinking, not as an engineer, but understanding how products and tools can serve this purpose. And so, I first became part of a program with the International Center for Journalists. It was almost like a hackathon, but a product innovation, program. The goal of it was to see how journalists can think as product thinkers and build a tool that was sustainable. And I realized I was so good at it. Maybe that's when I figured that the silent base engineering skill I had or knowledge I had remained there for me because the first tool I built was called Media Inlet with a group of women. It was all women. And what we built, I was working with women at the time, from Peru and from Serbia. And we were just working on what tool can bring back trust in journalism. And we built something called Media Inlet, a prototype that was supposed to be a very interactive listening and engagement tool so that audiences can watch through how investigations are coordinated. So if you say you give a pitch and you give a hint or a tip to your newsroom and then you just walked away, you never know what your tip is going to do. You wake up tomorrow, maybe they talk to you, maybe they don't, and you see a story. That's how you know that your tool was serviceable. But what about if you can see how the newsroom works through this tool that allows you follow through, a process and steps and just basically a lineup of processes that you can click, you can get notifications on. So you know the journey of your tool, and you also know where you could contribute more or who you can refer the journalist to as a source. It was supposed to be that kind of working tool. I'm still very proud of it. But my first entry into that, a year later after that, I started working with the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. And it was very important to me to connect my knowledge that I had now started building, got into the Craig Newmark, the CUNY, Craig Newmark University for journalism, did some projects with them and started growing from there in product and innovation, thinking what connects with the audience, how can they feel more engaged in this, and really how can they trust what I'm doing because I'm hearing and listening to them. And the build began, and that landed me to the products with the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. And one of them that I'm particularly proud of is what we just built last year called ElectionWatch, which sprung from those experiences.
Can you talk a bit about your role at the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism and what the center is itself?
Right. So CCIJ is a very intersectional newsroom. We like to call it that. So we're a team of editors, product managers, metaverse designers, audience managers, so web designers. Our ultimate goal is to help journalists, freelance or otherwise, bring their investigations to life. And we are this remote mobile newsroom that you can take with you everywhere you go. We do not have journalists working for us, but our ultimate goal is to be able to tell stories, underreported stories in underreported places with very high standard investigative skills and formats. Our most valuable position is to be able to tell one single story in text, visual, immersive, and in data. So we combine these processes to tell one story so that we can reach as many audiences, and we can also set ourselves in the journalistic space as people who are very interested to not only tell your story, but tell it in the language that matters to you. We're a very collaborative space as well. So we work with journalists from all over the world, and we invite them to tell us what stories matter in their regions that have been unreported, and we support them to do that, all the way to giving you an editorial newsroom to work with, connecting you with other journalists and other newsrooms, and also, and this is globally, and also taking your story to conferences and awards and places that we can take it to give it as much visual reality as possible. And we then use many other methods to communicate. We do Twitter spaces where possible, just to get people to talk about the issue if that's the platform of language that serves. Or we go on radio or TV or any form of social that works, just to get the local audiences to see the investigation about them. That's what we do, primarily as what guides us, our mission and our ethos. And what I do for CCIJ is I started with CCIJ as a project manager and editor, because that's really what I am. And I manage some of our biggest stories. And one of our stories that led to the product and innovation role was called Democracy Deferred, where we investigated Nigeria's presidential election in the year 2023. And when we investigated this, we found a lot of qualities that affect democratic processes during elections. And we classified them into groups. One of them was misinformation and disinformation. Another was about suppression that happens to voters during the time. And some of them were violation of electoral laws, for instance, or malfeasance around the electoral tools and tech. But we realized that most of these four qualities I just mentioned affect democracies everywhere. And interestingly, they also affect strong democracies, like that in the United States, for instance. CCIJ is a US-based newsroom. We realized that disinformation and misinformation during elections, especially, comes with some kind of malinformation where there is a lot of malice. So the information people are getting, you think you're organically curating them, but during elections, they're particularly designed to touch your emotional soft spots and your fears. And it's done with a little bit of malice. So you go to the votes thinking you're voting what you think is righteous, but sometimes you're actually voting against that enemy of yours because there's a lot of malice in that information. And you're like, you're not going to get in because I'll do everything in my democratic power to stop you from getting in. It's no longer about the issues and all of that. What's interesting in electoral misinformation. And a year after that, we got a grant from Journalism EI, from supported by the London School of Economics. And the question was, journalists build something innovative that can serve after you're done with the work. And we thought, why do we not build a tool that we would have loved to have during that investigation? It cost us a year and two weeks to do that. But if we had this tool, we probably would have spent about 6 months doing it. And we designed ElectionWatch, and that is how my role shifted into product and innovation, designing that tool, a game that we housed on Fortnite, and metaverse simulations, that led us into the innovation space.
Yeah. So what is ElectionWatch?
ElectionWatch is a AI agent that really just serves as a tool to help journalists analyze disinformation during elections and after elections and before the elections, just once the conversation starts going on, which is sometimes 2 or 3 years of a journalist's life cycle in every democratic chapter. And then it helps you maps the narratives after it has analyzed them. It helps you map what exactly the sentiments around this narrative is. Not just whether it's true or false. It's not a fact checking agent. It maps out the sentiments behind them so that we can get to the core of the emotion. And then it points out who the actors are around this noise of information you're getting. And ElectionWatch goes an extra mile to try to do that in hard to access platforms like TikTok and Telegram. And right now, it's in its young prototype stage. We're going through a funding cycle for it right now and taking it to not just newsrooms, but funders who are very interested in electoral independence, and also very interested in newsrooms regaining the strength. It works for a journalist as an independent journalist or a newsroom, and sometimes election monitors who want to refer to it. Its absolute goal is to be able to draw the sentiments out of these narratives and produce reports that journalists could use to write stories, not just as fact checks what's true or false, but what exactly their audiences feel about the stories going on. ElectionWatch monitors these things, or rather analyzes these information through multiple languages and through multiple sentiments as well. So you can train it as a journalist. You just, by training it, all you need to do is upload all the social media noise that you're finding on elections from your locality, and it will draw the sentiments out. Every region feels differently about the information in their environment, and especially the ones that affect their daily life, like election and health. For now, it serves election purposes. Tomorrow, it could serve health disinformation purposes, but analyzing from that very core sentimental basis and giving you factual context as a journalist to work with.
Sounds ambitious, but it also
It's very
sounds
ambitious.
also
Yeah.
sounds very important. So what what happened that you realized that, fact checking wasn't enough? That you thought we have to go beyond this, we have to move towards sentiment, we have to move towards, yeah.
Because I was a fact checker for a while. I was a fact checker for about 2, 3 years, and all I did was fact checking. I very well commend fact checkers in journalism because I found it incredibly hectic and very psychologically draining. On one hand, you are trying to tell people the truth of a matter. Sometimes you're fact checking the most horrid things, and people still choose what they want nonetheless. Even when they see the facts, even when they see the truth, they assume it to be your truth. We live in a world where everyone is an independent, or we like to believe that we are independent curators of our information. So when someone tells me that the information that I have chosen to believe is false, and they tell me it's false because I did a Google reverse image search, which some people don't even know what that is, or I questioned this source who you believe in so much, like maybe your religious leader or this politician you love beyond anything. And I tell you, hey, I fact checked him, he lied 7 million times. You're invariably calling me a liar, because I've chosen to believe what he's saying. So, but why don't we investigate beyond the facts and the truth of the matter to why we believe this anyway? Why this is important to us anyway? Now, I cannot completely judge or confirm your bias or not, but at least let's discuss why that exists and why that is a truth today. I'll give an instance. One of the things we're working now on ElectionWatch is to try to increase its multiple languages and introduce Spanish and introduce a few newsrooms, community newsrooms in the US leading towards the midterm elections. And we've been told by sources and journalists that we've talked about how much disinformation, for instance, during elections grows within the Spanish community in the United States. But here's the thing, you can't just say it grows and say it's all false. Your grandma believes it, your cousins believe it. They're going to go to the polls believing it. You can argue about that at family dinners all you want. It's not going to change it. But what if their community newsroom that they also trust, communities trust their local newsrooms more than they do the big giant conglomerates of journalism and media in the world today? And what if their community newsroom says, I see this is going on, on the socials, we're all talking about it. Their community radio host tells them, I can see why this narrative is going around. I was talking at the diner yesterday with a couple I met, and this is the conversation we had. He's used ElectionWatch, or she's used ElectionWatch to analyze that dialogue, that narrative that's spreading, right? And seeing the sentiments people are having. Is it false? Is it negative? And why that exists? In essence, maybe people are communicating and chatting under that, like, you know what? I really do hate this politician because he grows a goat and kills goats at his backyard, or whatever it is it might be. And that's the sentiment. Overall, the sentiment is false or true because people probably resent something in this underlying core, which is the nuance behind the post you're seeing. So it's not a true or false. It's a, why is this true? And perhaps we can see it this way. All the data ElectionWatch is producing is handed over to the journalists to do that job. It's not for the tool to do the job, but the tool's job is to help you see the underlying sentiments, and then you as a journalist can run with that. From my career, both on radio and working on investigations, I know that when you talk to people in full detail and discuss with them about the sentiments that guide their beliefs, there's a lot that comes out of it. I might not convince you, but at least you love talking to me. You will hate me a little less for being on the other side of the divide. And hopefully ElectionWatch does that to newsrooms, especially independent journalists and independent community-based newsrooms.
So you have witnessed quite an evolution, I would imagine, in journalism for different reasons. There's been the rise of AI most recently.
Yeah.
But even before that, there's the rise of, more and more independent journalists, or because of social media, the ability for anyone to report on anything, right? Without fact checking, without context, or in false context. So it seems like the work you're doing, trying to innovate in journalism, is trying to keep ahead of those things, or at least on top of those things, but also to look forward, and figure out what the future of journalism is going to look like. So how has that been playing out? How has that made your job harder? How has it made it more exciting, rewarding?
I love that question. I really do love it. I think there have been moments when it's either harder or exciting or rewarding or just infuriating. There's been moments. And I strongly believe that journalism, being an age-old, industry and profession, tends to be behind technological innovation, a step or two behind. Not in adaptation, in analysis. We can analyze anything and predict any future except for tech. And when tech has come, we're talking about tech and slow to adapting tech, right? Adopting, whichever we choose to do in the space. We're often a little bit slow, and it's understandable why we're wary. It's our job to be sort of gatekeepers of the trends of the world and the movement of the world, to look at it from an analyst point of view and to analyze. You're not perhaps thinking innovation. You're obviously thinking either in hindsight to learn from, the future. What that has done is the only currency we have, which is the audience, has now somehow left us, and they are curating our jobs for themselves, right? And trusting us a little less with that. And so you can't exactly be empowering someone who already feels empowered, with information that they'll get with or without you anyway, right? So the idea now is, what's our relevance, and how do we make that relevance exciting for the people who are the backbone of our jobs? At the core of journalism, it is the audience, the environment you live in. You're only working because that environment exists. So I would say that the journey that I've seen, I made a presentation once at the University of Athens, and I said, we've gone through the journey from when it was word of mouth. When something happens, I run to tell you about it. When people will communally gather to hear the one news that they would not have heard otherwise. And then they decide, I'm not going to go searching for this news. I'll just leave it to the town crier to tell me, or to this local person in the community who always has all the gists, right? And then it moves to writing it down on paper. The newspaper came, the radio came, the TV came. And then we got into the space where, so what's next? First, it was a little bit of dabbling into immersive journalism, then out of there into AI, and back again into the XR, AR space, VR space. And that's that space now. And I think for me, personally, what's interesting for me is that I'm looking for a way to map how the editorials work into a sort of project management, where you guide how that goes, and into product management, where they somehow work together rather than separately. Because when you tie that, we're this innovative space in journalism now, for instance, there's a little bit of hesitance to invest in journalism and journalism tech. But newsroom workflows are being done. Journalists are learning vibe coding, and everybody's trying to build something. But in the end, if you look at the tech space itself, it's not a lot of tools making the headway, but more or less some unique foundational technology that's building a lot of things. So what's the unique foundational technology that's going to build a lot of things in journalism? We haven't figured it out yet. Every newsroom is trying to use AI to modernize their workflows, or to do something better in one space or the other. But I think that the more we introduce technological thinking and systematic thinking into journalism itself, we will be able to find that foundational technology that can build a lot of modern journalism. We're still searching for it. And that's what's frustrating, that no one else seemed to help us get there. Sometimes not even journalists want to help journalists get there. I wish we could, and I wish we would do that soon and fast. And I'm very interested to talk to technologists and, communicators and, people like you, just to have a sort of mini think tank where we're thinking, what's the foundational tech that will build modern journalism tomorrow, that will allow us keep our audiences, serve a very crucial space and not diminish? Because I am frustrated with journalists. We write good stories, we do really great work, and then we give ourselves awards for it that our audiences really don't even connect to. So we need to meet them where they are. And what's the foundational tech that'll get us there?
Yeah. Okay. So I have this question that in the past few years I have wanted to ask a journalist personally, and yeah, I like rehearse it in my head, like, because I don't know any journalists, and now this opportunity has fallen into
Oh
my lap.
no.
I'm so excited about this. Okay, so we're talking about truth and the unwavering pursuit of truth. You're also talking about transparency, right? Into the process and how things come to light. And we've also talked about the influx of everyone being a journalist. Anyone can report anything at any time. But there is one thing that seems to remain sacred in journalism that we can't touch, and I don't understand why. And that
Okay.
is the protection of sources. Why is it that when a journalist says an unidentified source, we're just supposed to accept that and say, "Oh, okay," because we're also saying there are more and more people calling themselves journalists, whether they are or are not, and who may be using AI, and we're supposed to just trust that they have this source that is reliable. And I can't connect the dots of transparency versus credibility.
Yeah. Oh, I feel so honored being the journalist to answer the question. Okay. You are right. Everybody these days, someone asked me once, so what makes me a journalist? I know what makes me a doctor. I know that I have to pass the bar to be a lawyer. What makes me a journalist? And it was a very interesting question because it was a journalism student asking me that. Like, what's the extra criteria that I need to do to say, okay, fine, that separates me from that person that says they are a, freelance person going around. And it brings us to this question. Before, we would say, is our ethics. And even right now, I'll still tell you is ethics. And I'll say one of those ethics is to protect my source, right? To make sure that when a person tells me something, that thing is sacred and they're protected and they're not open or exposed to danger when they do that. And that they can walk around knowing that they contributed to great information providing and uncovering and unearthing, great harm, but they're not in harm's way. Let me give you an example. When a person, I mean, you've heard a lot of big breaking news, especially in the US, and say, there was a source behind it that was protected. When sources sometimes are uncovered, you can hear the death of a source. People chased out of their countries. We try our best to do stories. I mean, lately, a lot of journalists I work with, especially as an editor and with other editors more experienced than I am, is to try to keep the names of our sources open. This person told me this. But when we're working on election stories in a country where people die for elections, some of our sources were just ordinary people who saw who killed their family during an election, just because of who they voted for, or who know that their lives would be in danger for saying that they witnessed something. Now, how do you tell that story and name that person, that simple person who just wants to tell you this wrong was done and I saw it, but I just want to go on with my life anyway? How do you protect them? How do you give them your word and say, you will be safe when you tell me that? But then this comes back to that innovation thing you're talking about and the foundational tech that can help journalism get to where it's going. Everyone now can come and claim they're a journalist and they have a source, and the source could be nothing. So how do I know that this journalist is ethical and really protecting a source? Before, it used to be with the newsroom you were affiliated with, and now it's no longer that way. So it's a very valid question. And this is how I would try to answer it if I had any answer, which honestly I do not have, but I'm going to posit because I'm brave. So I'm going to say that we protect and continue to protect sources because we want to bring information to everyone around that information affects. So everyone around that area, to everyone who, causation and the impetus of that thing existing affects. We want to do it protecting them because sometimes the source is them. They're the ones that are the sources, and they're the powerless. Sources are often without strength and protection, and we're the only protection they have. Now, how do I get you, my audience, to believe me when I say I have a good source and I need to protect the source? I think it comes back to how we journalize today, how we do the job today. Our audiences no longer give us that carte blanche trust that, our sources is valid and safe. So how do I prove to you that I vetted this thing? How can I tell you a little bit more about this person without giving you the name of the person? And I think that's what we journalists need to start thinking, because people like you are asking us that question. No one has ever asked me this question you've been holding on. So you see a journalist tomorrow, you got to ask them that question. I'm going to take this question to conferences and to other conversations with journalists and say, how do people trust your source and trust you for giving them an unnamed source? I think overall is in transparency, in letting you come through the journey with me and stop you at the door where I say, this is where I protect my source now, right? These are the things I can't give you. But you know what? These are the things I can give you. And then give you a few open sources too that you can access that can make you understand why this one source I won't give you should stay protected. And in the end, it's just getting you to trust me again. That's all. But I cannot not protect my source when they need it.
It's interesting. So you gave a very great case for why the source needs to be protected, and that makes sense to me. What you're describing for the trust between the consumer of the journalism and the journalist, that seems to be on a scale, right? There's trust or there is not trust. And so that seems to be the thing that needs to be verified, validated, enhanced. Is how do we enhance the credibility of the journalist so that when they say I have a protected source, we understand and we just say, okay, we get it. And so that seems to be a challenge to overcome or to tackle, is how do we
Absolutely.
say this is a journalist and we can say they have this level of integrity because of their track record of this, and this, right? There's a lineage or a history that comes with that journalist that backs up that integrity that then makes the case for protecting their source.
Except for today, you can have some random influencer or voice on the internet who decides that their influencing is journalistic and telling you the news around you.
Right,
And they could have been
right.
doing that from the beginning of Twitter. So if you're checking their history, you'll say their history is as long as Twitter's. So you trust them, right? Which used to
Yes,
be the
yeah.
way. Yeah, I'm just trying to make a case that which used to be the way when you say you're affiliated with a legacy newsroom, everyone trusts you because they trust the history of that newsroom. But now that people are independently curating and trusting content creators and influencers for their news, you could very well say, oh, they've been telling me this and they've never failed for 10 years, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. So it comes back to what I said before. What is the foundational tech that we need now for a tech forward
Yeah.
audience, right? That will make you say, okay, I trust this journalist because they have this, 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 this. And you cannot be a journalist unless you pass A, B, C, D. And not the traditional ones we used to have before, but the new age tech foundational ones for a tech forward audience.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have that because I'm a searcher and I haven't yet found, and I'm still searching. So, yeah.
So in the field of project management, there's the PMP, right? There's the project management professional. It is not something you need to have in order to manage a project. But if you walk into a job interview and you have that certification behind your name, you are that much more qualified because the interviewer knows that you have put yourself through that rigor. Does
Yes.
that type of standard or qualifier exist today for journalists?
Yes, and sort of. So, yes, in the case, for instance, I'm not a product innovation manager because I decided to change my title. I went through a process of news product training with the NPA, the News Product Alliance, and got a certification for that. Worked with product managers in tech and news thinkers and all of that formation that makes you a news product. So I'm not a product manager in the tech sense, like tomorrow I'm managing this tech, but I can and I will be, and I am because I'm managing tech in terms of news. But news is my core foundation. The journalism is the core thing that guides any innovation that I work on. Right? I went through that rigor and through that process, but not everybody does. To answer directly the project manager one, in journalism, it's less about the product management certification you get as it is the projects you've worked on
Mhm.
and the outcome of them. How rigorous were they? What lessons did you learn? How long were they? Do you know why? It's because project management and product management in news and in journalism are still jobs that are so desperately needed, but you still need to convince powers that be that they need it. You still need to convince a, journal, a journalist or a newsroom that they need someone to do these things, right? So sometimes they dabble, or an editor becomes a project manager, or they roll through a project and it's finally successful, and they're like, well, we did it. We don't need one in this space. And also, because of the uniqueness of the journalistic foundation and ethics and the discipline, you sometimes need these people to grow from within the industry as opposed to, from outside in. Outside in, they never get the weirdness of news and journalism and the thinking behind it. Inside in, what is missing is a structure and systemic thinking that you can provide, right? So strategy and moving through strategic processes can be a little dampening for the news process. So it takes an insider to figure out how to merge that and the process itself to have an outcome that satisfies everyone, or at least that we can all live with if no one is satisfied. That's it. And there are organizations working towards that certification, just like you asked, but still there's a struggle to make newsrooms recognize that they need this and also to build it from within. And I think in the next 10 years max, everyone will understand what certification you need for those roles. But for now, it's based on experience as well, you know? Yeah.
So you're Nigerian. You're
Yes, I am.
working on global disinformation.
Yes.
You work on a product called ElectionWatch, within a US based organization
Yeah.
where Western elections dominate much of the global news stories
Yeah.
for some reason. Does the African context give you a vantage point that Western journalism is missing?
In US today, absolutely. Maybe in US 30 years ago, no, but then I wasn't a journalist then. But in US today, absolutely. Because as an African journalist, I have seen journalists before me, journalists after, go through a changing phase of this thing called democracy. The changing phase, the way it affects information, the way it affects freedoms, the way it affects everything. I mean, I live in a country that's gone through a full-on dictatorships, autocratic democracies, and we're still looking for what you've always enjoyed in America for centuries. And from that point of view, when an American journalist is speaking today about the kind of restrictions that are new to them, I have experienced it. I was trained on it to anticipate it, to expect it from people before me who have lived and died for the cause. I have a wealth of experience. And with all due respect to my American colleagues, thinking this is special and this is somehow new and unique and it somehow has to be a breakthrough way to do it. What I see from global conferences that we attend is there's a lot of journalists, American and Western and otherwise, who are trying to learn from how we've been doing it and the best way to navigate this. There are many journalists in Africa, in Nigeria and other African countries who work in very repressive governments, autocratic democracies. You can't say they're not a democracy, but everything remains as if it weren't, right? And they claim the press is free, but we know we're not free. Are you going to spend a lot of time talking about that freedom, or are you going to spend a lot of time figuring out how to be relevant to those who need you the most? You can't pick or choose because both matter. So what exactly are you going to do? And I'm excited about one thing though. 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would see that it was a Western journalist telling an African journalist what to do, how to do it. Even though you don't live in that environment, you don't navigate the forces. When you fly in, and that used to be called helicopter journalism back then. When you fly in, you would hire someone like me to show you the ropes, and then you would do the reports. You have your cameras, or you write your big stories for your big newsrooms, and you're gone. But that's a special condition in which you've existed at that time. You're gone. The curated experience you have is done. I live in that craziness. But working with an American organization and seeing how the conversation going on amongst us journalists now is so encouraging because people are saying, you know what? How do you do it? Tell me how you do it. I want to understand how I can do it better because you still do have those laws and the backing is still yours. I don't have most of those protections. You still have it. You're just watching it erode slowly or maybe a little quicker than you planned. And it's surprising to you that you'll be a journalist one day without those protections that have always guided your profession. So what do? You turn to your colleagues who have lived in that state. And as an equal space, we all conversate, and discuss how to do it. And that's what's happening now for journalists in the US. And that's where the collaboration comes in. As you know, CCIJ, it's in our name and it's in our practice. The collaboration comes in, not just with us and CCIJ, but I see that happening with a lot of journalists from Africa and spreading out elsewhere. How do we keep being journalists in a world where trust is gone, autocracy is thriving, and freedom of press now has many meanings? How do we keep working? The only way to do it is for all journalists globally to discuss how you do it. How can I learn from you and how can you learn from me? And perhaps we would survive into a new chapter of another kind of democracy because journalism has always done that. It has survived democracies, it has survived dictatorships, it has survived monarchies, it has survived authoritarianism, and then all kinds of governments. And it will continue to survive to the next one. But I think we're doing better now, learning from each other.
So we have this question we like to ask all of our guests. So HeroX crowdsourcing platform, we run challenge competitions and to help solve hard problems. We have this massive global community around the world of inventors, scientists, researchers, engineers, anybody who is passionate about solving a problem. So if you could design a challenge competition around one unsolved problem in journalism today, so it would follow this model of send us your best ideas and the top 3-5 winners get a prize. Maybe they get to go prototype it, but they get a prize for that submission. What would that challenge be?
There's a lot of those challenges going on now, right? In the journalism space that I dislike. Okay. What do you want to do for your newsroom workflow? What do you want to do for this? So if I was going to design one, I'll ask, design something ambitious that you think will in future change the entire landscape and thinking and ecosystem of a foundational problem. It could be in journalism or globally, basically using journalistic ethics. It could be what the new age of journalism will be through ABCD, what the new conversation style will be amongst journalists and their audiences, what election coverage would look like, like I'm trying to do, what perhaps even tech would look like to serve journalism. I don't know what it is. It's not well formed. You just ambushed me right now with this question that I love. But what I would say is I don't want to know how you're going to build something for your newsroom to work better. I don't want to know how you're going to use vibe coding to fix a scheduling problem. Anybody can do that. We have to be frank that anybody at this point will be able to do that in the next 10 years, right? If I have a quick problem, I can vibe code my way to a solution. I don't need a thinker to do that. But why don't we have a competition where they're thinkers? And as I said, nobody has designed this foundational technology that would bring in a new age of journalism for a tech intelligent audience. Why don't we have a competition? It's ambitious and many of them might not make sense, but we can take a chance on the craziness and then see where we come across. Where do we end up? I want to see that. I want to see that kind of competition. It will need money. It will need a lot of tech people saying, yes, go ahead and experiment and go crazy. We don't care. It will need a lot of journalists who would stop thinking about journalism as it is and think completely out of the box and go crazy. But after all the craziness, it would be such fun. And I would love to have that kind of fun in journalism. It would be such fun. Yeah.
All right. No, thank you. Well, Nelly, this has been fantastic. All of the things that you've mentioned, plus some more, we will include in the description and make sure that people can find out how to get involved and connect with you. I really appreciate the approach that you take to your work, the methods that you take, and the basis on which you work with the ethics foundation and the transparency and of course the innovation. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Jamie. You've really made my morning. I appreciate it.